Thank you, Laura. Now, the NHS cannot guarantee patient safety during strikes. That's the stark warning from health leaders in a letter to the Prime Minister, urging him to reopen talks on pay rises, a really critical stage at the moment.
Well, the plea comes as thousands of ambulance staff walk out today following nurses' strike action yesterday. We're joined now by the author of that letter. It's the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, Matthew Taylor. Good morning to you. Thanks for joining us this morning. So there's a real worry about the consequences of this strike action. Do you think that lives could be lost because of it?
Well, the action is taking place at the worst possible time for the health service because it's winter, and winter is always pretty tough, but it's made much tougher this year by a variety of factors, including the fact that we have 130,000 vacancies in the NHS, but also the degree of prevalence of illness in the community. So things would be very difficult for us anyway, but this industrial action coming on top of that puts us in a much more perilous situation. And the trade unions today have agreed that they will respond to genuine life-threatening emergencies. So if you have such an emergency, then do ring 999. But it won't be able to respond to other forms of urgent and critical illness. So there will be people who need to be attended to who may not get the response that they need in the time that they need it. And also this action has all sorts of kind of knock-on effects. The nurses' action unfortunately led to thousands of cancelled operations. If the industrial action rolls on, that more and more of that will happen. So, you know, there's no question that when you take vital members out of the NHS staff, it has an impact, and that does lead to patient harm, and it does lead to patient risk.
Now, the NHS Confederation, you're a membership body, and all these trusts and the various organisations connected to the NHS are all part of your confederation. Now, you know, have you seen this coming? Did you think that we would get to this point? Because you must have been speaking to your members for months, if not longer than that, even. And is there anything that you could have done, perhaps, to prevent this?
Well, we've been talking for a very long time about the growing workforce crisis in the health service. So, you know, we went into COVID with 100,000 vacancies. We've got 130,000 now. So there are real issues about how we recruit staff, retain staff, motivate staff. And it's important to say, you know, if there were no trade unions and there were no strikes, we would still have that workforce crisis. We've been calling for years for a workforce strategy, and it looks as though we might finally get one next year, but it's years too late. So we've been talking about those issues. And in terms of the industrial action, yes, we have been saying for a long time now that the government and we need the trade unions to negotiate in good faith and try to find a way forward. And what we said yesterday, I mean, this was not something that was easy for us to say. Our leaders take immense pride in coping with the difficulties and the challenges of running the NHS. But many leaders had contacted me and said that they had reached a situation where they felt we had to be honest with the public, with the politicians, with the trade unions, and say that this industrial action today and further industrial action going forward is going to have severe impacts, and it's no good pretending otherwise.
When you say we are entering dangerous territory, I mean, you know, it's really quite serious speak, isn't it? How dangerous are we talking here? And at what point? Are we talking days, weeks, months? I mean, you know, because we're not getting anywhere with these strikes. It looks like we're probably going to get more strikes in January. Are you saying end of January we're going to be in absolute dire straits?
Look, things are very difficult now. It's important to emphasise that the health service is making progress in key areas. You know, we have many people waiting 2 years for operations. We don't have any people, hardly anyone waiting that long. We're getting to the stage where very few people will be waiting more than 18 months. We make enormous progress on the vaccination programme, cancer diagnosis. So we are working flat out, and in many areas we're making progress. But this winter we face a kind of perfect storm. We have those vacancies. We have high levels of illness out in the community. We've got the backlog that built up during COVID. So this is the worst possible time for industrial action. It was already the case, even without the ambulance industrial action today, that it was taking us twice as long to get to people in category 2. That's not immediate life-threatening emergencies, but it's severe and critical conditions. It was taking us twice as long to get to those people already. So yes, this is a very difficult time. And what we need, and this is why we said what we said yesterday to the Prime Minister, is we need the government and the trade unions to step away from the rhetoric and step towards the negotiating table to find a pragmatic and creative way of getting through where we are now, getting away from this industrial action, these winter months and trying to create a more positive context to resolve the workforce issues that we face.
Difficult. We've got this deadlock situation, haven't we, where the unions are calling for this increase in pay. The government do not want to talk about the pay increase. They say that's not feasible at the moment. Their priority is to keep inflation down, and they are referring to the independent pay review body, aren't they, as a means of increasing pay. The Prime Minister yesterday seemed to suggest he hadn't ruled out changing the remit of pay bodies in the future. When you say that this is the worst possible time for this strike action to be taking place, is there any sort of sense that actually could we just move this on and say, OK, we can't talk about pay for now, but we will be able to look at this at some point in the future to be able to come back to it? You know, what's the situation with when we can get some resolution if we're in this deadlock?
Well, we think no stone should be left unturned in trying to find a way forward. It's not for us, I think, to advocate exactly what that is. It has to be negotiated between the government and the trade unions, and we will negotiate ourselves as leaders if we're given a mandate by the government to do so. Look, I understand where the trade unions are coming from. They have seen pay fall in real terms. Their staff have had to face enormous pressures. There are real issues about morale. People are leaving the service because they don't feel they can offer the quality of care that they want to provide. And I have worked in government. I understand the pressures on government. I understand that they're facing industrial action on multiple fronts. They're worried about public expenditure. But we are where we are. And this is why we said what we said yesterday, and we're saying it again today. We understand the challenges facing both sides, but we cannot allow this industrial action to drift on, because every day it happens, we do more damage to the service. It has more impact on patients. And that's why, you know, whilst we understand where people are coming from, we need to use imagination. We need to be pragmatic. We need to find a way of ending this industrial action before it does more harm.
Quickly, would you say that it is the government's responsibility to move first on this?
What I would say is, if the government continues to say it won't negotiate on pay, it's clear that the trade unions will not negotiate if pay is not on the table, which means the industrial action is going to continue. So it doesn't really matter where it comes from, but we do need people to look at a way of trying to resolve this. And certainly, if the government was able to offer some reason for the trade unions to return to the negotiating table, that could be a start.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, Matthew Taylor, Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation. We'll be talking about this some time to come, I think.
I think so, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Everybody wants resolution. It's difficult for anyone who's falls ill today, wants to call 999, but hopefully something could be sorted out soon.